right. Hey, what's up, guys? Sorry, there were some technical issues on the previously started stream, so I had to restart it. But we're good now. So, yeah, as I was saying, really inspired by this game, Mechabellum. I think it's a super fun strategy game. And my biggest issue with it is that it only runs on my Windows PC. I know they're working on a Mac desktop version, but I also just think the UI would require significant overhaul to work on a phone. And there's no reason why we can't play this game or a game very much like it on our phones. So that's kind of the goal here. So I'm going to let it play. This guy, Rooster PB, he plays a lot. I watch his games and kind of explains the strategy that he's using while he plays the game. And it's a really engaging game. It really makes your brain think a lot about, like strategy. How do I counter certain strategies? How do I implement certain strategies? And how do I develop these strategies? And it's a fun, visually impressive game with just really fun play. So my goal is to build something very similar to this, but kind of more set in a like Warcraft style world with like wizards, knights, humans, and animals, potentially other creatures. So kind of moving away from the mech and robot feeling of Mechabellum, but maintaining the real-time, or rather turn-based strategy aspect of it. So yeah, that's kind of a high-level description of the goal. And we're gonna go for that. I don't have a title yet for the game, but I would describe it as a Warcraft 3-like turn-based game that I'm going to be building. So I think kind of my first thought is how do we make this kind of actually usable or playable on a phone? And is that necessarily what I'm optimizing for? I do think if I build this correctly, it should be able to run on your desktop and on your phone. And when I think of games that have been successful like that, I think about Hearthstone and Magic the Gathering are really good examples of games that run almost exactly the same on your phone and on the computer. So yeah, I think, like this card selection screen, these sidebar UIs, and kind of the general UI, the HP bars, the round indicator, the time left, a lot of this stuff, these little buttons here, they would generally kind of work on mobile. They probably need to be a little bit bigger. But that's good. Another one of the mechanics of like zooming in and out, moving around the screen, moving around the battlefield, that would also work really well on a mobile device. So that's the good news. The bad news is a lot of the detail is really hard to see on a smaller screen. Like, you guys are watching me build this. If you're on your phone, you can barely see shit. You can't really see much at all. So, not really sure how to think about that. I do really like all the mechanics, though. Like, you've got this swarm type of unit. You've got like a swarm or chaff clear type of unit. You've got like heavier, larger units. I think if I kind of moved away from the swarm units, the detail would be easier to capture. But I do really like the swarm unit mechanic. So yeah, so I'm basically thinking we're gonna kind of keep it and maybe kind of do a mapping one to one of like relevant units and how they can be like reskinned in a medieval or magical or organic type of world as opposed to mechanical from Mechabellum. So I've had a lot of thoughts around this and was thinking like for instance instead of crawlers, which are like these little drilling units, we could have snakes. So it's basically like a swap in replacement. Um, yeah, and instead of a lot of these things, we can just kind of swap them in for other things. So I think I think that part is okay actually. So yeah, I think the way I'm gonna get to a solution is to kind of start building the board. And for that, I started looking into a battleship tutorial. Um, this guy's using Unity 6, which I'm using, and he's making a board for his battleship game. So let me go back to watching this and try to get through this.
And you go ahead and say board manager, let's call it V1. I'm gonna delete this, it's just for an example. And behaviors, this is something I'm interested in. So that's a good enhancement. So let's go ahead and create a mono behavior. So you just create a mono behavior and you go ahead and say board.
So it looks like I'm gonna have to go back a little bit. Probably just gonna make this over here, and that might make it easier for me. I'll leave the music over here, because at least that way I can keep the window open at the right size, in case I want to show something else in that zone. Cool. All right. So yeah, let's try to see how he built
Once you
the
create a
game board, and we're gonna try to copy that into the new project that I'm building.
prefab, what you can do is name of this. So in this particular case, in the prefabs folder, I already have right for two that unit, then pretty much everything that you have rigged up on that particular prefab is going to be available to you at runtime, and everything will work pretty cool. So how do we create a prefab? So the way I like to structure my projects is that I would have a proper folder structure for it. Obviously, you'd have a folder for models, folder for prefab, scenes, scripts, textures, audio, whatever it is, any asset that you have, you should have some sort of a structure to it, right? So in this particular case, in the prefabs folder, I already have created a board unit, and we can actually see that it's the same. So how do we do this? Simply you drag and drop that particular game object that's active in the scene over to your assets folder, anywhere in the assets folder, that would create a prefab for you. So once you create a prefab, what you can do is rename it. So I went ahead and renamed it to board unit. And it seems like now Unity doesn't allow you to create the same name as is. Start applying into it. I'm gonna go. We have Unity Editor for
Let's
this
start from the
particular
beginning.
project. We decided to go with the latest Unity 6, LTS 26 F1. And what we want to do is start applying some of the concepts that we discussed in the introductory video. And if you haven't seen that, or if you don't know what a battleship game is about, or if you want to get a perspective on the actual historical aspects and also the gameplay, go ahead and check that video. It's a short introductory video, and also it will kind of give you an idea of what we are going to be doing over the course of the next few videos coming up. So Unity 6, latest Unity, and apparently it's supposed to be the greatest. There are some really cool enhancements to it, and obviously there are some changes, so you might have to take some time to familiarize yourself with the actual new IDE and the graphical interface. But let's go ahead and just jump into it. So the primary task for us right now is to be able to implement the boards, the board layout. And if you recall, in the Battleship, it's a board game. So we are going to have two separate boards. One of them is going to represent the player's board, and the other one's going to represent the opponent's board. In this case, the opponent is going to be the AI. So what we want to do is first compose or construct the board units. And in order for us to do that, we are going to utilize Unity's built-in primitive system, geometric primitive. So we are going to utilize a cube.
All right. So we've already made a cube.
And
we did that yesterday.
Let's go ahead and keep we are going to change some of the scaling over here. So we'll keep it at the unit scale. So X and the Z axis are going to be 1 unit. But let's go ahead and shrink it down to 0.01 on the Y axis. So that will give us a really nice
Yep, I did that.
kind of like a board unit, not too thick, not too thin. It's going to be pretty cool. So the next thing what we want to do is actually create a prefab of this, because later on we are going to utilize the prefab to dynamically generate the board. So in order for us to do that, we need to instantiate this particular game object at runtime. So there's several ways you can do this actually. You can actually do it all through code. You can create generate a primitive at runtime, and then you can apply the scale similarly at runtime. So in this case, it's kind of pretty straightforward. So if you go that route, it's going to be super simple, not too many complex coding that you have to do. But generally speaking, it's best to once you have your model kind of set, you want to save that as a prefab, and it would be easier to instantiate that prefab. And then obviously the prefab itself is going to have a bunch of mono behaviors later on that you might want to incorporate. So if you don't, so one of the benefits of a prefab is to basically encapsulate all of those things in a particular unit. And when you're instantiating that unit, then pretty much everything that you have rigged up on that particular prefab is going to be available to you at runtime, and everything will work really cool. So how do we create a prefab? So the way I like to structure my projects is that I would have a proper folder structure for it. Obviously, you'd have a folder for models, folder for prefab, scenes, scripts, textures, audio, whatever it is, any asset that you have, you should have some sort of a structure to it, right? So in this particular case, in the prefabs folder, I already have created a board unit, and we can actually see that it's the same. So how do we do this? Simply you drag and drop that particular game object that's active in the scene over to your assets folder, anywhere in the assets folder, that would create a prefab for you. So once you create a prefab, what you can do is rename it. So I went ahead and renamed it to board unit.
Okay, let me pause this. So he's calling it board unit. I'm going to go ahead and just call it board tile. Because the way I see it is that the units will spawn on the tiles, but it's not a battleship game. Yeah.
And it seems like now Unity doesn't allow you to create the same name as the other one. So basically, I'm gonna go ahead and delete the old one.
One of the minor thing I
And
want to do is I have these symbols to represent the light source and the camera and the cube, but he doesn't. I wonder how I can get rid of that because it's super annoying. Okay, I mean, it's clearly this icons thing. If I remove 3D icons, they're 2D icons, but I don't like the icons at all. I mean, I don't really care. What is a fade gizmo? What is a selection outline? I mean, they're not hurting. I just want to understand how he doesn't have them. So he's got some different selections on that part. Grid and snap, the tool settings. What is this? AI navigation. Interesting. View options. Okay. What does this one do? Interesting. It's not really clear how to hide those. And it's also not really that important. So I'm going to keep going with it.
Go ahead and rename this board unit. There we go. So now we have our prefab. Let's just double check and make sure the transform information is all good. It's all good. Okay, cool. So the next step would be, okay, we need to somehow auto-generate this at runtime. In order for us to do that, we need to write some code. So we would create like a board manager. In fact, I've already done a board manager, but how do you create a script?
Okay, so we want a script called board manager. Did I do that already? Looks like I did not do that, so that's okay. That's okay. So let's go ahead and do that. So how does he do
Well,
it?
we discussed how you can create scripts in other videos. You can go ahead and take a look at them. But quickly, you go to create, and notice over here that the context menu has changed from the older versions of Unity, which is kind of good because now we have each category on its own subfolder, basically, which makes it really
This guy
nice
really needs to just
eventually.
focus on the task
Previously,
at
if
hand.
you were coming back from older versions of
I don't
Unity,
care about.
you would get
Nobody
an
cares
extremely
about
long context
older
menu,
versions.
which you had to scroll up and down to find a specific
Literally nobody wants to hear
components
this.
or objects that you were interested in. In this particular case, we go to the scripting and notice that even on the scripting side, here we have a better context menu. So traditionally, majority of the scripts used to be mono behaviors. Now we have scriptable objects, which is cool. Then you can have just like an empty C# script, perfect for containers, data classes, and etc. Not scriptable objects, right? Just traditional classes without any behaviors. And then we have this new concept called playables. We'll get into this later, probably not in this particular series, but at some point after we complete this particular project, I'm going to talk about playables and playable behaviors. This is something new. We didn't have this before. So we'll take a look at this and see how we can take advantage of that. Then, of course, we have assembly definitions and references. So these are something new to Unity 6 as far as being able to directly create them from the context menu. So that's a good enhancement. So let's
Wow.
go ahead and create a
Thank you.
mono
Could've
behavior.
just
So
not
you
done
just
any of that.
create a mono behavior and you go ahead and say board manager. Let's call it V1. I'm gonna delete this, it's just for an example. And when you go ahead and create the script, Unity will do what it does. And if you double click on it, your favorite, oops, we zoomed in too much. Actually, that was by an accident. Let's set this back to 150 over here. Okay, so Unity will bring this up for you, an outline of your class. And usually I like to format the document for my tapping and etc. Now you have a base to get started. So in the class over here, this is what we are going to discuss, how to put this together to generate the board dynamically. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, switch over to the actual.
So this is what he's written for his. It's interesting that he's calling it player board and AI board. Another interesting thing is he's got this, which I don't fully know what this syntax is, but board is a new game object 1010. So it looks like he's declared a single board on the board manager. Or is it an array of boards? I could ask the AI what this means, and I will. I use Claude for most of my coding stuff, so let's go ahead and start by saying, explain this line of C#. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of learning here for me, and I'm going to hold off on promoting the channel until I'm in a place where it's not painful. You know, if this guy made his code open source, I would recommend him to other people. There's a lot of things he could do differently, but that's not really the point of this, is it? So let's go ahead and put this in this zone, actually. This makes a 2D array of game objects. Okay, so it is in fact just a single board. I don't understand how he's going to use that to make multiple boards, but we'll find out.
Board manager that is implemented, and the reason I'm doing it this way is because it's gonna take less time for me to, rather than type it up and then explain as we are going through it. I already have completed the script that we need to discuss, and all we are going to do is concentrate on the explanation of it. So in this particular case, we are going to generate two boards. One of them is going to be for the player, and the second one is going to be for the AI.
So the way I'm approaching this actually is it's going to be a networked game. So we're just going to have a player 1 board and a player 2 board. And I'm going to have to find a way to allow individual users to connect and be associated with either player 1 or player 2. And likely what I'll do is I'll also make an AI player that can control the player 2. So the way I'm going to implement this is it's going to be like create player 1 board, create player 2 board. But I'm not really understanding his design. So let's keep watching.
And eventually what we are going to do later on is that we are going to create separate classes that is going to handle each one of these board types. So just for the sake of it at this point, I just want to illustrate how you can dynamically generate this board and what happens. So let's go ahead and run our example. should delete that as well. We don't need it anymore. So in order for this to actually execute, it needs to be attached to a game object that's already inside the scene. So let's go ahead and create a board manager. So we'll create an empty game object called board manager. And I usually like to start a board game object that's already inside the scene. So let's go ahead and create a board manager. So we'll create an empty game object called board manager.
I wonder why he's creating an object
and I usually
with
like
an
to
underscore.
start all of the manager classes with an underscore and move them to the top. That way it's easier access.
Okay, let's kind of follow that. I'm sure there's a good reason behind it. So we're gonna create an empty board manager object, game object. We're gonna move it to the top of this sample scene, which we could potentially rename. I don't know how to rename it, but that's okay.
And what we'll do is drag and drop that board manager class over to the board manager game object, class over to the board manager game object as an attachment. And over here, we have two
how did he do
properties
that? Do I just
that are
drag it over
exposed.
here? Yeah.
One
okay.
of them is for the board unit prefab that we created. So let's go ahead and assign that.
Okay, so he doesn't
just
actually
drag and
show the
drop
code.
that
Is
guy
that the
over
idea?
here. And the other one is a parent transform. And this transform is going to be used as the origin where the center of the board is going to be. And then basically it's going to utilize that particular position to generate the two boards. So the player's board is going to be generated on the left side, and the enemy's board is going to be generated on the right side. So all we need to do is also allocate a transform. So we can utilize either the origin, which is placed at 0, 0, 0, or similarly the board manager, which is placed at 0, 0, 0. So let's go ahead and just utilize board manager. And now we have all of the inputs that the board manager is requiring. So now that we have those, let's go ahead and click play. And voila. So we have our board generated. So we have two boards basically, and right now you can't really tell about the board units, but there are board units here, right? So basically, if we open this up under board manager, we have board 1, unit 1, and it will go all the way down until it generates the 10 by 10 grid.
Oh, cool.
And then eventually what we are going to do, prefab object that we are utilizing to generate. So let's bring and see what the board manager, how the board manager actually executed this code.
Let's take a look.
So let's bring this up. So we have the parent transform. We have the board unit prefab object that we are utilizing to generate the board itself. Then we have some sort of a data structure. In this case, again, a 2-dimensional board array of game objects of size 10 by 10. And what we are doing over here is that we are going to create a player's board, and when we are creating the player's board, we have two loops, right? The first loop is going to be for the rows, and the second loop is going to be for the columns. And basically, this iterates over it. Inside the iteration, we are instantiating our board unit prefab, but we are positioning it based on the units, in this case, the indices that are coming from the row and the column. And what we are doing is that we are attaching it to some sort of a parent object. In this case, the parent happens to be the transform that we have associated to the game manager. The next thing what we are doing is that we are applying some sort of a name using the string formatter. So we have B1 and we are passing in the row and the column, and we are formatting it to the C Sharp's numeric string, in this case, utilizing it with 2 digits. And eventually, what we are doing is that we are storing that game object that we just instantiated into our board array at that particular space, because later on we are going to utilize this to determine whether that particular space is going to be occupied or not. And then obviously over here, we are updating the name and incrementing our rows and our column. Our space is going to be our array at that particular space, because later on we are going to utilize this to determine whether that particular space is.
Okay, so like this is all pretty straightforward. He's putting the player board in the board variable, but where's he putting the AI board? I don't really understand
and then
that.
Obviously over here we are updating the name and incrementing our rows and our columns. So this is the pretty much execution logic for it, right?
And
so
similarly,
we have the for the creating AI.
Okay, so if we look at the AI board, he's creating the board. Looks like he's also putting it on the same board object. So he probably just has two instances of the board manager.
Board is kind of the same. So same mechanism, but we are starting our columns and rows. We are basically displacing them by X amount. And if you notice,
Okay.
our actual board unit itself was 1 by 1.
Okay, so this is making more sense. He has a single board, and the single board contains a single grid, and within that single grid, both the player 1 and the player 2 units exist. That makes a lot of sense, and wonder if I want to follow the same pattern, which I likely do, right? In the game Mechabellum, the units are placeable for each player in part of the board, and they do share the entire board. So, yeah, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Cool. So, I'm still not kind of liking some of his code design, but let me go ahead and start kind of copying it into my project. So let's go to the board manager. And if we go back to the part where he shows the top of the file, that might be nice. So I don't fully understand the use of the transform, but I'm sure it will become obvious soon. Might be good for me to start reading the docs, honestly. What is a parent transform? Oh, I see. It's just called transform. So a transform is the position, rotation, and scale of an object. Okay. So it's just like a position or rotation. So it's kind of describing an object. I wonder why he's calling it a parent transform, but I'm sure we'll get there. So let's go ahead and get that. So he calls a game object prefab. I want to instead call it. First he calls it board unit prefab. I'm going to call it board tile prefab.
here to help out.
Wow, I don't know how long I've been muted, but the good news is that nobody is watching, so it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm kind of just making this content just to show the world that I am going to make this content every day. And also just to get in the habit. And there's going to be mistakes. So, anyways, moving forward. I was just doing some kind of math to figure out how big is the Mechabellum game board. I'm pretty convinced that we can have a compelling gameplay experience on mobile with the same size game board. So, I came up with this by doing some napkin math. It's the player's placement area is 30 tiles long and 50 tiles wide. I don't know how exactly accurate that is, but that's what I'm going to do for my game. And I'm sure it'll give me plenty to work with. So yeah, we got 30 wide, 50 long, 30 long, 50 wide. And then I do like this kind of flanking ability that you have in this game. It's a really good mechanic. Does he do we have 5 or 6 tiles on the left and right? That's one part I want to understand. We'll just say it's 6, so 6 tiles each side. There's no concept of a rear flank in Mechabellum. So instead of it being 50 tiles wide, it's actually plus 12, right? Flank zone. So we're looking at 62 tiles wide. So the entire game board is like a 62 by 30, 62 by 60 grid, right? Because there's 2 of them. Right, so we're looking at 60 length, 60 tiles height, 62 tiles width. So given that that is the size of the game board that we want to make, I'm going to go ahead and get that done and be back in a little while after I get that done.